Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that my running mate Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. So I'm speaking to you from Georgia, the country, not the state. And a lot of Americans don't know there's a country called Georgia. When I told the bank I needed my debit card to do transactions in Georgia, they said, you don't need to get special permission for that because it's in the United States. I said, no, Georgia, the country. And the customer service rep looked down her list and she said, damn, I didn't know there was a country called Georgia. And then when I got here, my phone wasn't working. Technical glitch, we got solved. But when I talked to the phone customer reps, they said I was confused. Georgia is a state, not a country. So I had them Google Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, and that convinced them. And in fact, last night I had dinner with the international secretary of the Green Party, their general secretary, and a member of their exec committee. And the guy who is the international secretary, his name is Merab. I'm in a bathroom. I'm staying at a very affordable place that doesn't have a desk. It's so small, but it's clean and it's low price. So it's great for me. It's just when I got to use the computer, I got to go to the lobby downstairs. They do have tables. But anyway, Merab Sherabatsi. My familiarity with these Georgian names is not good, but Merab said back in the early 90s when he represented the Green Party at an environmental conference that the government sponsored in Washington, D.C., he had trouble convincing them he was from the country Georgia, not the state Georgia. And what finally convinced the people he was talking to at the time was a picture of him, of his president, Edward Shevardnadze, with Bill Clinton on the wall. So people may not know there's a country called Georgia, but what goes on here is going to have ramifications. Today, they're having a very fraught election. And there's been some violence. There's been accusations of fraud. The governing party is called Georgia Dream, and they've been in power since 2012. And they came to power with the help of the Green Party here, and Green was on their slate and served until 2020. And at that time, they were the pro-democracy party pushing out Shevardnadze. Well, Shevardnadze got pushed out by Saakashvili, who the former leader of the Greens went with in coalition and became actually the prime minister, a guy named Zavania. And then he died in mysterious circumstances. And then by 2007, this movement called the United National Movement became very authoritarian and repressive. So the Greens went in opposition, and that party, their goons went and smashed up the Green Party offices in 2007. It was pretty rough. But then the Greens joined this opposition coalition, which came to power in 2012. And so this guy, Merab, was in the parliament representing the Green Party as part of this slate. It's a proportional system, and people form slates of candidates of different parties and put them in order. So, Merab was pretty high on the list. And so he served 2 terms in parliament, but then went into opposition because the former opposition, Georgia Dream, now became increasingly authoritarian. So the Greens are now in opposition. So this election, the first reports have come out. Well, first of all, there were exit polls, and there were 2 polls. And, well, the basic dynamic in this election is Georgia Dream is moving closer to Russia and authoritarianism. There was a lot of protests. You may remember on podcasts I had earlier in the year, I had people from Georgia describing the movement against the foreign agents law, which is modeled after the law they have in Russia, which was used to suppress the anti-war movement and all political opposition when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started. And now the Georgians are fighting that. And it was first introduced last year, and the protests convinced the parliament to drop it. But then they brought it back, passed Parliament. The president, who's an independent, was endorsed by Georgia Dream, but she's not an authoritarian. She vetoed it, but then the Parliament overrode her veto. So now it's law. And, people in civil society, environmental groups, women's groups, I'll give you an example. There's a big movement against a big dam, which is displacing a lot of people in their villages and is owned by outsiders, not, like the oligarch who's behind the Georgia Dream. Is the richest man in Georgia, made his money in Russia. He is involved in that dam. And the opposition movement, this guy, his name is Benizi. I'm not good on the Georgia names. I don't even know if I wrote it down, but Benizi is his first name. Ivanishvili is his last name. And so he's been saying all the pro-European parties in opposition, which are also more pro-liberal democracy and authoritarianism, they're more, the other issue is this guy, Ivanishvili, the Georgia Dream Party, is running on, very conservative, Orthodox Christian, family values, anti-gay kind of platform. So they're trying to get the votes by appealing to people's prejudices. The opposition is saying the only issue in this election is pro-democracy and whether Georgia is going to open to the EU or be under the domination of Russia. And that's, the central issue. So I'm kind of rambling here. Trying to remember what I brought up the Georgia Dream. I was describing what the election was about. So those are the major issues. Are people voting on whether they want a multi-party democracy and access to the EU or a system more modeled after what you see in Russia? And what I was getting at was Ivanishvili, the oligarch, this multi-billionaire oligarch, is saying all this outside money is fomenting, disruption. But I've talked to one of the organizers of this, just a popular grassroots movement against this dam, the people in this valley that are going to be wiped out. And they have a lot of relatives who go to Europe, work menial jobs, particularly women doing, home health care or cleaning homes and things like that. And they're sending back, $5, $10 a week to support this movement. So that's a grassroots movement. And Ivanishvili says this is, it's, the kind of thing Putin says. Anytime there's a popular movement, they call it a color revolution and say the CIA is behind it, as if people don't have their own reasons for having revolutions against people oppressing them. So that's what this election's about. So the Harris poll and the Edison polls are American pollsters, pretty credible, had the opposition winning 60% in their exit polls. The poll that was commissioned by the Georgia Dream ruling party, a polling firm here in Eastern Europe called Gorby, they had the opposition, instead of getting 60%, getting only 46%. And so now both sides are declaring victory. The official commission has said the Georgia Dream has 53% of the vote. The opposition, whose titular spokesperson is this independent president, her name's Salome Zora. Write that one down. Zora Bichvili. And she's saying no, the opposition won with about 53% of the vote. And she's saying the Georgia Dream is trying to steal it. So I have an appointment tomorrow with a woman who's an environmental leader in this country. She was the Green Party's representative when they formed the European Green Party back in the 90s. She's no longer with the Green Party, but she does her, civil society work. And so she said, we're going to get together in the morning, and she sort of said, if the shit doesn't hit the fan. She didn't say it like that, but that's what she meant. So we'll see what it's like. So anyway, I'm going to talk to three Greens, the International Secretary, the General Secretary, and a guy on the exec committee named Guram Nikashvili, who was on this podcast back in into June, talking about the movement against the foreign agents law. And I'll meet with this woman who is also on NATO. That's her first name. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to just get all these new Georgian names in my head, but NATO is the environmentalist. I'm meeting with a leftist who is with a new socialist group here, sort of new left kind of socialism. They don't want, the old authoritarian state socialism of the Soviet model, and they don't want the accommodation to capitalism of the social democratic Western European model. They want a real participatory new left socialism. So they're a small group just getting started. And so I'm going to meet with all these people. I'm writing up reports. In fact, it's already in the chat. I wrote up my first report yesterday. I'm just calling them dispatches from Europe. And number one, I just finished number two. I'll check it for, spelling and send that off here when we're done on this podcast. And then get to sleep because I got to get up early to meet with this environmentalist who's early riser. So we're going to go for a walk with her dog and then eat. And hopefully I'll do a video interview with her. And those will be part of my dispatches from Europe. So if you go on the HowieHawkins.us website, there's the update section. I haven't been doing a lot of updating lately because I haven't been campaigning, but this seems like the appropriate spot for that. So you can follow what I'm doing. I'm going from here to, then I'm going to be in Ukraine for 2 or 3 weeks. And, giving those people voices about what's going on. And then I'll meet with Greens and socialists in Warsaw, Poland, or they call it Warsaw from here, Berlin, Germany, London, England, or the UK. Then I got to go back to Prague, where I've been invited to speak at Charles University about the labor movement in the US. And then I'll go to Paris, France, and finally back to the US first week of December. And I'll be telling, Greens and lefties in Europe what's going on with the Green and the left in the United States, particularly after our election, which is fraught and coming up on November 5th. And also, bringing back to you and people in the Green Party and the left in general, how people in Eastern and Western Europe are thinking about these various international questions in particular, but also, all the issues from climate change to the war in Ukraine. So that's why I'm in this bathroom in Georgia right now. And I don't know what else to tell you. I kind of summarized the election. And you can read what I wrote. I kind of pointed out that, Georgia and the U.S. are similar in that it's kind of liberal democracy versus a oligarch, billionaire oligarch autocrat. And it's not just here. Moldova just had an election where that was the question. And another oligarch based in Russia was spending hundreds of millions of dollars in Moldova. They had a referendum on whether to put in their constitution they want to join the EU. It narrowly passed. And then the president, who's pro-EU, got the most votes, but not enough to win in the first round. So they have a runoff in a month. So Moldova, Ukraine, and the U.S., Moldova, Georgia, and the U.S. have similarity that one of the parties is a billionaires and an oligarchic party, talking about Trump in the U.S. And the opposition is not, the kind of green socialist politics we want, but at least they're for liberal democracy and leave political space for those of us on the left to organize without having to go underground and all the things that entails and, risking imprisonment or violence. That's what happens in an autocracy when they don't want the opposition to speak. And, I'll just say a little bit more and then I'll see if you got any questions. But I was talking to these Greens. 2 of them go back to the early Green Party, which formed here in 1989. And they were a central part of the movement for multi-party democracy and Georgian independence. So even though, they're not even on a party slate this time, they couldn't, I guess I didn't explain that. They couldn't get a an agreement with any of the opposition parties, who are very contentious and divided. The only thing they agree on is they oppose the Georgia Dream Party that rules the country. So they formed a coalition, but the Greens couldn't negotiate their way onto a list where one of their people might have a chance to get into Parliament. So they're not running. They didn't run. They can't run independent. They say the oligarchs control the media. It's the same thing we face in the U.S., including the social media. It's people like Elon Musk control their platforms here, like he controls formerly Twitter, now X. So they're going to focus on local elections next year. So I was going to say something else, but I forgot. I'm still suffering a little jet lag. When I met with these guys last night, they're all drinking vodka and beer, and we're eating Georgian food. I was drinking coffee. I drank 3 cups of coffee because I flew through 2 nights in 24 hours, and I don't know what that did to my biorhythms, but I'm jet lagged, and probably my biorhythms are confused as hell. So anyway, it may be why I'm rambling a bit and forgetting where I was going with some of the things I'm saying. But that's the picture here. This Georgia election is, very important to, particularly Europe. I mean, Viktor Orban, the Hungarian authoritarian, has already congratulated Ivanishvili, the billionaire here, oligarch, on a victory, even though it's very contested. So this is an election with a lot of international ramifications. So I don't see any questions there yet. Oh, I was comparing. I'll get to that question. I was comparing Moldova, Georgia, and the U.S. It's democracy versus pro-autocracy, pro-Russian billionaires, and there's also a similarity between Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine in that Russia occupies portions of those countries. Russia occupies 20% of Georgia, 20% of Ukraine, and 12% of Moldova, and is intervening in their politics. In the case of Ukraine, by invading it. And that's one of the things people are afraid here. If the opposition wins, I mean, if Ivanishvili, the billionaire, the oligarch, has been saying the pro-European parties want to start a war. So one of the things trying to scare people and just voting for Georgia Dream so Russia doesn't invade. Russia's invaded here twice. They grabbed 2 provinces. First right after independence. Although the Greens tell me that was about a pipeline. The first government of Georgia agreed to a pipeline to take gas from Azerbaijan through Georgia, through Armenia, through Turkey, and on to Europe. And the Russians want to control the gas going to Europe. They wanted that gas line, instead of turning left to Armenia, south to Armenia, turn north to Russia, then through Ukraine, which at that time, the Russians controlled those pipelines through Ukraine. And in fact, there's still Russian gas going through Ukraine under older contracts that, Zelensky and the Ukrainian government still honoring. But that was, geopolitics and, basically imperial control that the Russians wanted. So when the Georgians went ahead and built that pipeline, the Russians invaded and grabbed these 2 provinces and then just sat there and administered them, and the Georgia government couldn't. And then they invaded again and had another war in 2008 after George W. Bush declared that he wanted to bring Georgia as well as Ukraine into NATO, which I think was unnecessary at that time in particular. But that, Russia said, okay, you want to do that? Well, we're going to recognize these 2 provinces as independent. And in the course of that second war, because they started shelling Georgian positions, about 200,000 ethnic Georgians were expelled from South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which are the 2 provinces they took which have, their Ossetians and their Abkhazians, who are a little different language and culture than the Georgians. So the Russians were fomenting this, ethnic division. So it's a sad game. So anyway, what was that question again? Oh, did I see the free and equal debate? No. But Quay Daniel Albawagi, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Please, who won the election? Well, in Georgia, the official commission is saying the Georgia Dream won. The billionaires party. The exit polls, two of them by Harris and Edison, which we know in America are pretty reliable, said the opposition one was 60%. The exit poll that the ruling party commissioned from an outfit called Gorby, which I guess is here in Eastern Europe, said the opposition only got 46%. So the opposition is declaring, if the official result is 53% for the Georgia Dream, that the election was rigged. There's a lot of reports of ballot stuffing and other fraud. So the fear of a lot of people is this is going to be decided in the streets, and maybe with Russian military intervention if it gets, really out of hand. So it's hard to say who won the election, I guess is my best answer at this point. And we're just in the first hours. The official election commission report was an hour and 22 minutes ago at 10 o'clock here in Georgia time, which is about 2 o'clock Eastern time. Chris Blankenhorn, does Russia have the capacity to intervene militarily or invade, as some worry? Yeah, Russia's pretty stretched out between Ukraine, obviously, Syria, their Africa Corps, which is the former Wagner private military company, in the Sahel and the Central African Republic and Sudan. So they're stretched out, but they certainly have enough capacity to come into Georgia. Georgia, on the other hand, hardly has a military. Georgia couldn't fight. In fact, what soldiers they did have, a lot of them volunteered to go fight Russia and Ukraine. So, Russia could probably roll right in to Georgia militarily, and the resistance would have to be, nonviolent, strikes, boycotts, different forms of non-cooperation, which is hard to do. The Russians, when they occupy, like we see in the Donbass and the parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson that they control, they make it really hard on people in their occupation if they don't cooperate. I'm talking about, imprisonment, harassment, lack of access to services, and in some cases, violence against people, sexual violence, or sometimes murder, disappearance, execution. So they have the capacity to intervene. Politically, it'll be costly for them. It won't be popular around the world, but that doesn't seem to bother them in Ukraine. Kevin Sanchez, did you hear Trump on the Joe Rogan podcast? I heard about it. I've never listened to Joe Rogan. We'll never get over two rich men complaining about government waste when they want to pour billions more into the military and mass incarceration. Yeah, I hear about Joe Rogan. I hear he's kind of a, patriarchal, misogynistic kind of guy, and pretty much on the right. But it sounds like they were complaining about government waste, and they support, military spending. Yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy. Trump, Elon Musk, who really hasn't sold that much, but he's got a lot of government subsidies. And that's, I guess he got some of his money from PayPal when he was a partner there. And but, he wasn't the innovator there. He was just, I think, in early, if I remember correctly. And he's parlayed that into, what he's doing with Tesla and SpaceX. The government's paying for that, big time. So it's ironic that, he wants to be the cost cutter for Trump if Trump wins. And he'll cut costs for everybody except himself. It doesn't look good. And what I have noticed, I didn't listen to that podcast, but I have noticed the latest polls have tightened. So it's pretty much a dead heat in the United States. And people over here, I'll tell you, they're really worried if Trump comes in, what that's going to mean for this part of the world. And, whether, Ukraine will get any support, whether he'll give a flying F about what happens to the Georgians if, Russia does intervene. Not to mention, issues that they're concerned about like we are, like climate change. I did hear a clip of Trump today. I still get Sirius radio because everything here in Georgia, I can't understand it. So, and he was saying, it was a clip from Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan was asking, is there a place for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in your administration? And Trump said, well, maybe, but I got to be careful because he doesn't like oil and gas, and I do. That's what we're going to get with climate, with Trump. We're going to get, an acceleration as much as he can of, putting more greenhouse gases into the climate. And then, baseless conspiracy theories that he isn't doing anything to correct, that, this Hurricane Milton, the right wingers are saying it was directed by a government, some kind of government way of controlling hurricanes. And, that gets around, particularly the right-wing conspiracy circles. And so they think, Biden wanted to beat up the Republican areas that were hit by this hurricane. So he directed a hurricane at them. It's really divorced from reality, but people are accepting it. It's very concerning, when people buy these baseless conspiracies. I don't know what they're really thinking. I mean, we got to deal with reality. You can't just live like a little kid believing in Peter Pan and the Easter Bunny. Apparently, some people do that in their own way as adults. Via email, did you watch the Free and Equal debate? No, I was that last night? See, night there is day here. I'm 8 hours ahead of you. So if it was in the evening there, it was, like say 8 o'clock there, it was 4 a.m. here. And I was asleep. I didn't get up to watch that debate. And I pretty much know what everybody's going to say. That was Jill Stein, the Green, Oliver Chase, or Chase Oliver, the Libertarian, and Terry, whatever his name is, from the Constitution Party, the anti-abortion militant. I don't know. I think I kind of know where those people stand. I wonder what kind of debate it was. They're all coming from such different places. But so I guess I'll hear more about it, but I didn't watch it. Vicky Cordon, any concerns about violence during elections? There might not have results about the winner on November 5th. Okay, you're talking about the U.S. elections. And yeah, I'm worried about violence in the U.S. for sure. There are reports that there are about 40,000 armed militants supporting Trump. The Proud Boys and all those crazy groups. The Republicans apparently have organized about 170,000 poll watchers who are going to be challenging people to vote, which can lead to conflict and violence. So there's a lot of potential there. We won't have the results on November 5th. If it's at all close, Pennsylvania doesn't start counting early ballots and absentee ballots and military ballots. In other words, the paper ballots mailed in till the day after the election. So Friday night, Trump's going to be out there saying he won. And if the balance is hanging on Pennsylvania, which it well could, that's going to take a few days to count. That gives Trump and his minions plenty of time to stir up all kinds of trouble about the election being rigged if they're behind. Of course, if they're ahead, they're going to say everything's good, and maybe in Pennsylvania, if they're worried about they're going the wrong way, they'll say stop the count like they did against the Bush versus Gore count in Florida. So I'm concerned about violence, and although I read another thing today by somebody who said, don't worry about it. Most of these Trump guys are over 50, over 60. They're not in good shape. They don't have the energy to go out in the streets and cause that much trouble. The problem is it's a small minority that you got to worry about. And so, I don't think you got to worry about these old overweight guys going out and, doing a lot of stuff. It's the younger militants. And there are enough of them to cause a lot of trouble. So, yeah, I'm worried about it. Via email, thoughts on Bezos intervening and stopping the Washington Post from endorsing anyone for president. Yeah, him and that guy that owns the Los Angeles Times, I forget his name exactly, but he made his money in medicine. He came up with a cancer drug. I mean, they say they don't want to exacerbate divisions. I think they're afraid if Trump wins, he's going to go against them because their papers are about to endorse Harris. So I think it was gutless. It's suppression of speech. If Bezos wants to write a contrary opinion, he can get his own stuff in his own paper. So I think it's bad news. And it just shows that, Trump forces have got people intimidated, including billionaires, they can buy security. I mean, I think it's just terrible. Via email, thoughts on Musk offering money to voters. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact legal ins and outs, but there's people saying that, that's illegal election, buying votes. And whether it technically is or not, it certainly is just on the face of it. And what have we come to? It used to be this was underground. Now he's up there saying, here, sign. Well, it's to sign this petition that says they support the First and Second Amendments, which is nothing. What they're really doing is building an email list. And just getting attention to those people who are impressed with, by billionaires. They think, well, if they made all that money, they must be smart. They must know what they're doing. And therefore, I'm going to support them. Of course, Trump's a guy that lost money owning a casino. That's hard to do. That's like the house always wins if you don't mess with it, but that's the problem. He messed with it. He was pulling money out of there to support other failed projects. And he ended up going to bankruptcy court. Ahmed Soli Fafiru. I probably pronounced that wrong. My apologies. Howie Hawkins, how did you get interested in greenism, eco-socialism? So what is your strategy to get Generation Z interested in joining the Green Party? Well, the truth is, and we didn't call it eco-socialism at first, but I was an environmentalist as a teenager. I was in the Sierra Club, and the guy who headed the Sierra Club, David Brower, who's passed on now, split from the Sierra Club because the Sierra Club Executive Board decided to support the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant. And I'd read a book about nuclear power and how dangerous it was. So I was already with David Brower on that. So I followed him into Friends of the Earth. And then the Friends of the Earth newspaper published an article by John Stuart Mill, the economist, on the steady state economy. And I was thinking about that when I read it, and I said, well, okay, under capitalism, firms try to grow, they got to compete. So if you're going to have a steady state economy, you got to have an economy that plans how much production, how to get it distributed. You can't rely on the market or, the animal spirits of capitalists who are out there to, make as much money as possible. That creates a system like a cancer. It has no sense of balance and reciprocity with the ecosystem, like a cancer doesn't have that sense of balance with the organ system in a body. So at that point, I realized we need some kind of democratically planned economy. But I didn't know if I wanted to call it socialism because this is, 1968, 69. And the idea of socialism in the air then was the Soviet Union, authoritarian. My grandpa always used to tell me you couldn't quit your job there. You had to get permission of the party to change jobs, and you couldn't have a union to bargain. And, it was not good, and I believed that. And then I read an essay by Hal Draper called The Two Souls of Socialism. Basically, socialism from below, democratic, and socialism from above, the top-down, technocratic socialism of everybody from, Stalin and the communists in the Soviet Union to, the Fabian Society in the British Labour Party were very elitist and technocratic. And really didn't want the masses meddling with their, the plans they were making up. So I said, okay, democratic socialism, and it's got to be ecological. And around that time also, the Peace and Freedom Party had its first convention. And they had a section that wasn't called, like the other parties, conservation or even the environment. It was called ecology. And it talked about how our social system is intermixed with the environmental system. So how the social system operates affects whether the environment's going to be destroyed or not. And so anyway, that's where I got my, politics of ecological socialism. Although we didn't start using that term much until the 21st century. Although, in fact, I do know that the German Greens had an eco-socialist faction when they first started. And they were based in not Hamburg. I think it was Hamburg. Well, I may need to double check on that because that's also where Joschka Fischer, who was the leader of the Realos, and the eco-socialists were more to the left. But anyway, they were based there. And in the 70s, when they were talking about a new left party, Rudi Dutschke, who is the most famous 60s radical in Germany, he was the leader of German SDS, which was the socialist youth group of the Social Democratic Party, and was challenging the leadership. And then, he wanted to break away and start a new party. And unfortunately, he did a lot of the preliminary organizing, traveled all over Germany, got the anti-nuclear movement involved in the women's movement and the other environmental movements. And, the young radicals who had, a socialist or Marxist background. And he, helped organize the founding convention. And then he died because he'd been a Nazi tried to assassinate him in 67 or 68, shot him in the head and shoulder. He survived, but he had epileptic seizures. And unfortunately, like a few weeks before that first Green Party convention, he was taking a bath and he had an epileptic seizure and he drowned. So there was a described eco-socialist tendency in the initial Green Party in Germany. And so I was aware of that. But anyway, so that's the answer to the first question. That's how I came to eco-socialist perspective. To get Generation Z interested in joining the Green Party, I think we've got to be organized well at the local level, have a presence in street politics as well as electoral politics, have a presence that's face-to-face, not just on social media. We need to have cultural and educational events where people can get to know each other. We need a social media presence too, but we should also have that face-to-face personal relationships. And that's what sustains people in politics over the long run. You want to be part of a movement that's not just committed to principles you agree with, but is, fun and rewarding to be with. And I think that's true for the younger generation. They got more energy. And then the other issue, I think big for them, among other things, is climate. And the two major parties ain't dealing with that. So there's an opening for the Greens. And then there's, opportunity. The prospects for young people are not good today. They go to college, they get in debt, and then even then with credentials, it's hard to get the job they're looking for in a lot of cases. So that's where our economic justice or economic Bill of Rights program comes in. So I think those are, my thoughts on that question. I'm interested in other people's thoughts too, because I'm 72 years old. So, what these younger folks is really feeling, I'm getting secondhand and maybe not the full story even when I do talk to them. So I'm all ears on that question as well. Scout Trooper 164, do you think the outcome of the Russo-Ukrainian War is a coin flip? The Ukrainians are holding on, but the economy of both sides is suffering, even though Ukraine is doing somewhat better. I think, everything you're saying, I think is basically right. Both economies are suffering. I'm not sure the Ukrainian economy is doing somewhat better. They do have behind them, if it's given, the EU countries, let alone the United States, their GDPs are 11 times bigger than Russia's. So the industrial and economic backing Ukraine could have dwarfs what Russia could put to this, in a war of attrition. If the Western Europe, they may have to Trump-proof themselves and just say, Trump, go do your stupid stuff. We're going to have to do this ourselves. They have the resources to really back Ukraine and hopefully convince Putin that he can't win there and he's going to have to just leave and cut his losses and, or if it's not him, it'll be other elites or maybe even Russian society say, we need a change here because this is just killing a lot of our people. Over 600,000 casualties on the Russian side, according to reports by, many intelligence agencies that they've made public. Whether they got the exact right number or not, it's a lot. They're saying Russia's losing 1,200 people a day in the offensive they've been on all summer and into the fall. That's a lot of people. That's massive casualties. Over the course of a year, that's 400,000 casualties. That's bigger than Vietnam, for the American invaders. In a factor, it's like an order of magnitude faster killing people. We lost 50,000 troops, and if Russia's losing 400,000 in a year, that was over 10 years. So that's like 5,000 a year, and they're losing, what did I say, 400,000 a year. So compare 5,000 to 400,000 in 1 year. It's just a massive casualty rate. So, there's reason to believe that Russia's going to get tired, whether it's Putin or, elites around him or just the popular masses, get fed up and revolt. I wouldn't say it's a coin flip. It's really, if the West, and the U.S. should be part of this, gives Ukraine the weapons it needs to defend itself on a timely, consistent basis. What we've seen over the course of the Biden administration is Ukraine's been on a drip feed. The U.S. knew that Russia was coming in there. Intelligence said so, and it turns out to have been right. They amassed about 200,000 troops and invaded. And all the U.S. gave them were some javelins, anti-tank weapons. And then some Stingers, anti-air weapons, but, that doesn't get the jets, that just gets the helicopters that are providing close support. So Russia's been able to bomb with impunity. Ukraine asked for Patriot air defense systems, And it took, I forget how long, it was maybe a year before the U.S. said, okay, we'll provide them. And then it's another 6-9 months before they got them. And that was after Russia had destroyed a lot of the energy infrastructure that first winter. It took them a long time to decide, okay, we'll send you some advanced tanks. We'll send you some longer range artillery. All these decisions got dragged out. Instead of like saying, okay, we're going to help Ukraine defend itself, we're going to help themselves defend themselves and get serious about it. The administration policy has been what they call escalation management. Because Putin said, well, if you do this, I'm going to nuke you. And if you do that, I'm going to nuke you. And I think it's clear that he's bluffing. There's no, first of all, if they use nukes, the U.S. wouldn't have to use nukes, just conventional forces, between the U.S. and NATO could destroy the Russian army. Most of it's in Ukraine. They just destroy it in the occupied territories and the near rear, support. They'd be devastated. And Putin doesn't want to do that. Plus, radiation, the wind can change. I mean, there's just no sane reason to use nuclear weapons. But, apparently it intimidated Biden. Didn't want to. So they've given Ukraine enough to defend itself, but not enough to win. And so I don't think it's a coin toss. I think it's a political decision who wins. If the West decides we're going to defend Ukraine and give them the weapons they need to win, which is to push Russia out of their territory, then Ukraine will win. And if they don't, then the war is going to drag out. It's pretty clear the Ukrainians, they're going to fight if they have to go to guerrilla war like Afghanistan. They do not want to be dominated by Russia. They fought, centuries of colonization, not just by Russia, but by the Ottoman Empire, originally the Mongols, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and then, they finally got a few years of independence during the Russian Revolution, and the Red Army came in and, put their own people in charge. And then, the Holodomor, which was, mass starvation of the peasantry of Ukraine in order to feed the industrialization in the cities. Ukraine, and now that they've had 30 years of independence since 91, they're not going to give it up. So I don't think it's a coin flip. I think it's a matter of, political will. Sean Young, what positions do you see necessary for a national campaign team? How about a state and local? Positions, you mean like staff positions, I guess, not political positions. Well, I think at every level, you got to have a campaign manager to coordinate all the work, from doing a budget to raising the money for it, to hiring the staff to do field work or press work. So that's the first thing. You got to have a campaign manager that knows what they're doing or is willing to really go to school, literally, to learn how to do it. And I think Greens should, go to places like the Wellstone Institute if they don't know how to do it themselves, and learn how to run a campaign. And you don't have to do everything they say, but the nuts and bolts are taught at places like that, and they get up to date because they update after every election cycle for new circumstances. And I think you need a campaign manager at the local level. Probably the next person you want is a good fundraiser, somebody that knows how to ask for money and keep asking. Local elections, you can do more with house parties, which are also campaign mobilization things, opportunity for the candidate to introduce themselves as a person and talk about what they want to do if they're elected. It has the personal touch, and then people give money. And if you have those well organized, you can have them organized so, every evening you got 3 of them, and the candidate's there for about an hour each. The event at each house may go on a little before and after that. When I see Greens, and I've done this too, we tend to get an event and then we just spend the whole evening there. And that's, quality time, I guess, for the people who came to see you. But there are a lot of votes you got to get to win an election. So, so campaign manager, fundraiser, in the larger localities, certainly state and certainly federal, you need a good press secretary or media person who knows how to build relationships with reporters, has a good sense of what reporters are looking for, how to give them stories that makes it easy for them to do their job. And with media, you can reach a hell of a lot more people a lot faster than you can knocking on doors or walking in parades, or showing up on, well, this is media, showing up on different, AM and FM talk shows. And so those are the top three, campaign manager, a fundraiser, a press secretary. And I left out one that's even more important than the campaign manager, and that's a treasurer. You need somebody who's responsible and knows what the hell they're doing to do the campaign finance reporting. Because if you don't do that right, you're going to get fined. You're just going to have a lot of headaches. And so that position is, you got to have that before you even decide to run. And if you say, well, I'm not going to raise any money and I don't need a campaign manager because I'm going to be below the threshold to report, I would say you're not serious about running and you shouldn't run. Because you need money to produce literature. If you can raise enough, then to, and signage and those kinds of things. And then hopefully you can pay your staff at least a stipend, if not a, regular salary, which, compensates them for the time they're putting in and also, sort of solidifies their commitment. Because it's hard when you're trying to make ends meet and you're doing this as a volunteer. So, you need money. We don't need the millions and billions that the Democrats and Republicans are spending, but we need some money. So, yeah, treasurer, campaign manager, press secretary, and fundraiser. And those are kind of the basic areas, and you can build out from there. If you're running a national campaign, which would be a presidential campaign, it's the only national campaign there is, you're going to need a lot of people to, do the work of those different functions. So anyway, that's what I see as basic for, what you need for a campaign. Volunteer coordinator. It's a thankless job with a low return rate. It takes a special personality. Yes, I mean, that's something the campaign manager has to do. But if you can get somebody who's very good at coordinating volunteers, in other words, being in constant touch with them, giving them tasks that are needed, following up to make sure they do it, thanking them when they do it, doing things that, keeps people's spirits up, like meeting in groups, volunteer, you're trying to get volunteers to go out by themselves and, door knock all by themselves. A lot of people, they'd rather do it as at least partnering with somebody. So, they can commiserate on how hard it is, because it is. Most people don't answer the door. You just leave literature and a little note. And then some do, and some want to talk your head off about how everything you're doing is wrong. Of course, just as often you get rewarded and people thank you. But anyway, a volunteer coordinator, yeah, that's an important position too. I would say that's something the campaign manager would do until you get big enough that you need somebody to specialize in that. And if you're really, trying to win the campaign, you got to have a ground game. And that means door knocking and phone banking. And you're talking to the voters, personal touch, even if it's not you personally as a candidate, is one of your people saying, you vouch for this candidate and you think they're important and you want to hear what the person you're talking to says. It's another thing about canvassing. You got to listen more than you preach. Because a lot of people, they just want to unburden themselves about the issues that nobody's listening to them about. And the fact that you or your people just listen to them, even if they don't agree with you on policy or even know what your policies are, they're going to like that, and they're going to remember you, and you might get their vote. So that's the key to winning local elections, that personal touch. And I've been saying, we have about 160 Greens right now in office. We've won 1,500 elections since the 90s when we started running candidates. We ran a few in the 80s who won, but we've won 1,500 elections over that period. So, we have 200 or 300 or a couple hundred and 100 or 200 in office at any one point. There are 500,000 local offices in this country. We should be electing thousands. And that's the foundation upon which we can elect people to state legislatures and then the House of Representatives. And I contend that until the Greens get people in the House of Representatives, we're not going to impact national policy. Presidential races are fine. They get us on ballots, which we can then use for local races. They get our ideas out there, which, get picked up to one extent or another, like the Green New Deal. So we do affect the debate somewhat. And you can, with those ideas, recruit new people. We got to then plug them into real local organizations so they stay engaged. But in terms of influencing the national debate in the presidential race, when we're spending, I raised $500,000. Jill's raised over $2 million. But that's 1/1000th of the $1 billion and more that the Democrats and Republicans. 1/1000th of what we're like a grain of sand on a beach in terms of the impact we have with our money. So it's just a whole nother universe. On the other hand, congressional races are local. They're big local, but I think they're within our capacity. I've run a couple, and I've managed one where, we got 5-8% of the vote, shape the debate, define the debate. And in our district, it's the only time the Democrats have won in over, ever since there was one district for the city of Syracuse. Otherwise, in the suburbs. Otherwise, Republicans have controlled that district. And the reason is we didn't split the vote. We just changed the whole dynamic. We changed the debate. And the Democrat who won when I ran, then he lost when we didn't run. Then he won again when I managed another person's campaign. The reason he won those other times is when we weren't there, he would accommodate to the right. And it was a far right, one of those militant anti-abortion people that get arrested. I think she ended up in the Trump administration. She was in there for a couple of terms representing our district, which she didn't really represent, certainly on the abortion issue, but, people voted for Republican because the Democrat sounded like a Republican. He kept moving to the right to try to get Republican votes, which is why Harris has me worried. But then when the Green is in there, he's got to talk to our issues like Medicare for all. And it's hard to say you don't want universal health care, and a clean environment, the Green New Deal, and all these issues we bring up. When we're not there, the right wing sets the agenda. So we changed the whole dynamic, and we did it with, just $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in a congressional district with, 750,000 population. So we got a lot of earned media because we're worth, being on the media. We have interesting stories to tell. Good. We know what the hell we're talking about. So I say congressional races we can run competitive, serious races. And in some places we can win. And when we get a caucus of Greens in the House, then we're going to have leverage. Then the Democrats are going to have to bargain with us about some things to get, some of what they want so we can get some of what we want. And once we're in that position, then when we run presidential candidates, hey, we're part of Washington politics now, and the Green candidate will be taken seriously. But we got to build it up from the bottom. Our new website, Green Party Webzine, New Green Horizons, launches Monday, this coming Monday. And so, sign up for updates at that address. There really isn't a Green Party discussion bulletin where everybody, no matter what their point of view, can have their say, can debate each other. So we're going to be putting out articles, and it's not a green socialist thing. It's just a green thing. So the whole spectrum of green politics is welcome. And where we disagree, we can talk it through and, either understand each other better or maybe, get to a point where we're on the same page. And so we'll have articles, short form, long form, short commentaries, long form articles. And there'll be a space on the website for people to comment. We're going to moderate the comments so it's civil and constructive, not the kind of trolling and snarky one-upping that you get on Twitter and Facebook these days. We want a serious discussion, not a food fight. So that's starting on Monday. So get on the list and start following that, and hopefully that will be a place that Greens from around the country will go to find out what other Greens are thinking and to share their thoughts. So, Piloted Content Boutique, I hope you take a lot of pics and maybe a film tour for us. Well, I am going to do a lot of interviews, and I will take pictures as I can. I got them on my phone, and I got an iPad just for this because it's much better quality than my old iPhone, which is ancient. So yeah, that's what I aim to do. And as I get over this jet lag, like the environmental activist I'm meeting tomorrow, I'm going to ask her, can we do a interview right there? So hopefully she will do that, as well as we'll just talk politics and what's going on. So yeah, that's my goal, and hopefully I want to amplify the voices of Greens over here, particularly in Georgia and Ukraine. And I'm meeting with the Greens in the other countries just because I think they're not getting a real picture of what's going on in the U.S. politics. They don't understand the political system. I think in terms of Jill, somebody had a question about Ukraine. That is a problem for a lot of the Greens in Europe because they support Ukraine. They've been that current in European politics. I mean, it's been the most consistently supportive of Ukraine and the most consistently supportive of immigrants from Syria, North Africa, as well as Ukraine, and now, Palestine and Lebanon. Whereas all the other parties, including on the left, have made their accommodation with the right, where these anti-immigrant far-right parties are growing. We got Trump, they got the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, and these other, anti-immigrant far-right parties. And they're like Trump. They run on grievance. And the grievances they have are immigrants. It's the same racist crap you get here from the Trump people. And it's climate change, hurting your climate action, hurting your standard of living. So they are scapegoating wind generators and solar panels and, saying that's affecting their standard of living, which is nonsense. Climate change is really going to affect people's standards of living. Anyway, I'm just saying, I guess I'm just defending the Greens in that regard in Europe. And so that'll be what I'll be doing, trying to explain ourselves, explain our differences in the American Greens. Also, the difficulties we have with the political system. They have proportional representation, or at least runoff elections like in France. We got winner take all, which generates a two-party system, which gives us the terrible choices we have right now. And, I'm not surprised the polls are tightening because Harris is running to the right. She's running around with, Lynn Cheney and praising the endorsement of Dick Cheney. And her base is losing its enthusiasm. I think that's why the polls have tightened. And like I was talking about the congressional races we ran, when we ran, the Democrat had to run to the left, and they won. I mean, we got 5 to 8% in those two races, and the Democrat won by over 10% because the Republican looked like a right-wing nut. But when we weren't there to bring sanity to the election, the right-wing nut ran and the Democrat normalized them by taking them seriously and trying to accommodate their positions. And that's what we're getting now on this immigration. Most parties, except the Greens in Europe, are accommodating to the anti-immigrant sentiment. And so is the Harris campaign. That bill that she says I would sign on day one is a Republican bill that, Biden's negotiators compromised on almost everything. Not quite everything, but enough so that, for example, the right to asylum is no longer going to be a right. It's a privilege. Well, maybe we'll consider you asylum, but if we got enough staff, and otherwise you got to wait on the other side of the border till you get your turn, where, on the other side of that border may be what you're running from. Like all those people we deported back to Haiti under the Biden administration. So, I'm just afraid the politics of accommodating the right normalizes it, strengthens it. Whereas what we got to do to the right is ridicule it and defeat it politically, and just point out that they're batshit crazy. Talking about hurricanes, or that Marjorie Taylor Greene saying it was a Jewish laser that, they start the forest fires in Oregon. It's crazy stuff. And, that should be easy to landslide and defeat. But I think, this bipartisan approach of Biden, just made the Republicans seem like a normal political party when they're, becoming fascistic. So anyway, that, I guess, was my closing statement. So next Saturday, I think, if I'm not here live, I will try to get some interviews to Chris to post. But next Saturday is where are we? 27th, so it'll be November 2nd. So I'm arriving in Kyiv, Ukraine, at 8:00 by a bus if everything's on time. At 8:00 in Ukraine, I think the podcast will be at 10, so it gives me 2 hours leeway. So hopefully the other problem with Ukraine will be whether the electricity's on and the Wi-Fi is working. I do have a power pack, so I can get the juice probably for an hour-long podcast, but I don't know about the Wi-Fi. So, but I'll have some interviews by then that Chris can run. So one way or another, we'll have something for you next week. And then the week after that, I will be in Kyiv. I'll definitely have a good guest from, the Greens or the Socialists. The Socialists, they're speaking better English, so probably be somebody from what they call the social movement, Sotsialny Ruch. That's the strong democratic socialist organization there. So it's going to be like that. And I saw somebody asking, how long was I going to be over there? I get back to Syracuse on March 4th. So this is never been to Europe before. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm having fun trying to figure it out as I go. So we'll see you next week. I hope everybody has a good week. And I already voted. I guess you guys are ready to vote. Early voting in a lot of places. This election in the U.S. is on. And next week we won't have a result, but the week after we will. So good luck to us all, and have a good week, everybody.